Welcome to The Other Side of Yesterday, a podcast where we explore the stories of redemption, faith, and hope. Here, we dive into deep moments that define us, the questions that haunt us, and the God who transforms us. Everyone has a yesterday. Let's hear the other side. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of The Other Side of Yesterday. We have with us my dear friend, Brother Keith Dobbins.
Hey, good to be here.
Oh, and we're glad to have you. We're just here to share our story, what God's done. So if you can introduce yourself just briefly, who you are, where you're from, and kind of how we know each other.
Yeah, definitely, brother. Like I said, again, just seeing this coming to fruition is awesome. Having an opportunity to get to know each other again after, many years of probably knowing each other, but environments like this, just kind of hearing the ones you've had before and some of the stories you've shared by brothers that were on before, John, Gabe, and Brandon, and then reading some of the notes you sent. It's just awesome. I'm looking forward to even learning some things about myself. There's just a conversation that you don't always have with yourself that I think is long overdue. But again, Keith, first name, last name Dobbins, originally from Chicago, born and raised on the south side of Chicago most of my life until 18, and then went away to school, joined the military, did that most of my life, and now never thought it would be a Texan through and through. So officially driver's license, paying taxes, all the all the legal
Texan
stuff.
now.
But yeah, just trying to figure out where life is leading me. I got saved at a late age in life after college, and really kind of committed my life to walking with Christ even later than that. So now it's just, now having a family and kids and understanding a little bit more the role of what a Christian's supposed to be. I'm just realizing I failed too many years. So thankfully I got, some more time on the back end to be faithful and diligent. So just trying to figure out what it is and be obedient to do it. So
That's why the graciousness of God is so important.
yeah, buddy.
I always kind of tell people, like, we have that moment we get saved, and we have that moment where, like, oh, I'm really walking with Christ.
Yep.
Right? Those are almost like two separate moments for many of us. And it's okay, because that's the grace of God working itself out. And so you said, your family, you've got 2 kids?
Yeah, so I have a son, Aiden. He's 15, be 16 later this year, and then Lauren is 16, and she'll be 17 in the summer. She's going to be a senior in high school next year, and then Aiden has started off freshman year in high school this past year. So it's been trying to deal with almost like 2 little adults versus kids.
Yeah, that's a whole different shift.
Yeah, buddy, and so it's been a good challenge because you're seeing kids that are going to grow into hopefully one day, independent, responsible adults. And you see bits of it, but they're still, minded kids. They're still behaviorally kids. And it just reminds you of how precious time is that, some of the years that I feel like I waited too long to do some things, I still got time now. So I'm just trying to not blow it all and, waste the whole gamut of it.
Yeah.
But it's been awesome seeing them just growing and developing into their own little people.
Yeah, it's seeing your kids is amazing. Parenting them, it's an interesting thing because I'll see my son do something, and if it's wrong, I'm like, oh, he learned that from me.
Yeah,
like I gotta parent me out of him.
Yeah, we get the pictures, and you see, they look like me one day, they look like their mom the next.
Sure.
They act like me, one day the same. So it's just trying to figure out, all right, where can I, see aspects of me that I maybe can speak to that I wish somebody would have said to me when I was that age, or, and then finding myself, okay, it's good when they're like you, because it's like, well, what would I say to me that I would hear that if I can say that to that person that has some genetic, identifiers that maybe they'll hear it, potentially from me, and not necessarily have to wait for God to say stuff. I can actually be used as an instrument in some ways. But yeah, no, it's the most rewarding, challenging, frustrating. There's so many ways to put parenthood, but it's just like one of those things that you don't know what you're into until you're into it.
Yep.
But you really don't know the benefits and the blessings of it, and how much it grows you until you see the kids kind of develop through life. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, speaking of kids, let's get started with what was your childhood like? What was it like growing up in the South Side of Chicago?
Man, it was interesting enough. I've always tried to figure out if it's truly a dissociation or just forgetfulness that I don't remember a lot of the details
Sure.
growing up that I wish I did. You know, I mean, I grew up in to me, I felt like a stable home. I had a mom and a dad. Both worked. My mom was she was into, I would say, kind of social work, or did a lot with social service outreach through school. I know she went to school at University of Illinois in Chicago, or in Chicago for a brief stint. She actually, my alma mater is Hampton University in Virginia, and she went there for 1 year. But then she came back home, and I can't remember if it was because of financial reasons or what the details were. If her mom needed her home, but she finished up, and I think she got a degree in social sciences and wound up actually going into social work when she first was out of college. But then most of what I remember, because I was born in '75, and I think she went to college and she was 60. She was born in 42, so she would have went to college in the latter part of '50s, '60s, and most of what I remember, I think, her professionally was in the travel industry.
Oh, okay.
And I can't remember transitionally where she went from doing what she studied to what she was doing. What I remember most growing up, and benefiting from her being in that industry, traveling, around the country, and then her and my dad a little bit around the world. But having two parents was, now I look back now, it was awesome just seeing two parents in the house. My dad, was working as well. He actually, that was the track I remember him was social services. So
okay.
He dealt with a lot of troubled youth and foster home
Wow.
environments, and really was cool because I got to see places he worked, and see some of the kids that he dealt with, and it was kind of almost in a sense, I don't feel like I was sheltered, but it was cool to see the dynamic of what he worked with and then what I was growing up in.
Yeah.
Two different worlds, and so I always saw him, as a guy that could, just reach into the lives of anybody. He was, very postured guy. Really had a pretty, say strict, but a real structured upbringing. I mean, he was a knucklehead. I feel like more than I was growing up, because he thought by the age of 30 he was gonna be in jail or dead, just because he was running the streets a lot more. I feel like a lot more loosely than I was growing up. But always I feel like because of maybe that, maybe either surviving past 30, or he was married previously and had 3 kids, and unfortunately wasn't able to really be the father in the house that they would have liked him to be.
Sure.
I never really talked to him. I know he's had regrets, but I don't know if he really felt like, man, even when it was happening, like he wished he would have done stuff differently, because him and his first wife didn't work out too well together. So he, in a sense, wasn't there for the kids either. But anyway, growing up around him, early, I just felt like he was always the protector, always the provider, in a sense of being a father. Always, seems like he had a job most of my growing up years. Was in and out, of the life of us, but at the same time, I feel like was still present. Still had family memories, family moments. We got to travel and see the little small family we have, because my mom has a sister that recently found out that they don't have. I think they don't have the same mother or father. They basically didn't. They grew up together, but they're biologically don't have the same parents.
Oh, wow. Okay. And that's a recent discovery.
Well, yeah, I mean, I found it out, I want to say, when my mother passed away when I was 20. It was 2004, so I was 29, and then my aunt passed away. My mother's sister passed away. I want to say maybe 2017, 2018. And I want to say I found out more details about their life as sisters then. and it felt like they were always just sisters. That's just how I saw it. But then my cousin, my aunt's daughter, explained more about the details when they were growing up about my mom or my grandmother, my mother's mother, taking her in. And I still actually mention it now. I would love to get clarity on what their relationship was. But that was kind of the small family we had. Was really just we had family a little north of Chicago in a small city called Rockford, Illinois, and that's where my mother's mother, her side of the family was.
Okay.
And so we got to hang out with them. I got to know cousins that were there and hang out with them most of growing up. Throughout the year, we would visit them and they would come down. And then my grandmother was my staple person for the family. She had brothers and sisters, but I saw her as like the glue that it felt like kept the family together.
Right.
And so I was spoiled to some degree by her. Didn't ever force me to eat lima beans like you think grandparents do.
Yeah.
But she was actually in my life until I think it was 85, 84. And that's kind of, I think that was really the shift with my mom where things just changed, because that was really her rock. And, we went to church, I would say pretty religiously or faithfully, but I feel like I was never really, I don't remember anything from church.
Okay,
I remember
sure.
going, but don't remember what they were talking about, what they were preaching. And I don't know if it was just, maybe it wasn't sinking in with me. Maybe I was too distracted. But we were going consistently, and we felt like we were part of a church family. And then when my grandmother passed away, it was a total shift. We didn't go to family as a church, weren't really involved in church anymore. And then I feel like that's maybe the dynamic. There may have been some things going on with my mom and dad previously, but that's where I saw some of the cracks in the marriage, and some of the aspects that I feel like maybe have shaped me. And hopefully I feel like I'm not repeating in ways that they were bad things, but I felt that there were things that now that I look back on it, it was like, no, that wasn't healthy. That wasn't right.
Sure.
But it was still, I've never felt insecure growing up. I was part of in a neighborhood that was gang affiliated. We had one gang on our block and then another gang on another block, and it was interesting how it was so close in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
There was so many affiliations that when we got there, my brother and I, it was almost, most of the kids almost guaranteed that they were going to be part of a gang culture. And I remember one time, I don't know what had happened, but I remember it was shared to me that I guess the aspect of my father went to whoever was in the neighborhood that was, over the gang activity. And, he initiated the conversation to tell them, hey, this is what's going on. We're the Dobbins family. We're moving in the neighborhood. And if you guys, are considering my sons who, at the time, I think I was fairly young. I can't remember because it's the house I grew up in as a child. But I want to say maybe I was 5, 6-ish when I remember the conversation that he said he had. But and my brother's 5 years older, so he was about maybe 10.
Sure. Wow.
He said that if you're ever thinking about recruiting my kids into the gang, then you're recruiting 3 people, not 2 people. And he was basically saying you're recruiting him too. And so that just when I heard that as a kid growing up, that it really stuck to me because I really felt that his protection that covering was there to where all throughout my life, especially growing up, I ran through the neighborhood, the streets with a lot of the kids that were into stuff that didn't have. I mean, most of the families were nuclear families, but there were kids that came from broken homes. And a good number of kids that we had in the neighborhood were affiliated with gangs and just involved in the streets. And I just felt like something was different. Like they wouldn't allow me to be part of certain things.
Sure.
I felt like that conversation that was had that early was able to resonate later to where I felt like it was able to protect me from not being able to be fully engulfed into the culture. And I wasn't really as interested to really join that culture.
Sure.
But I wanted to experience it. So, I always tried to roll, with the guys when they went out, and
right.
Always tried to hear about the business of what was going on, and I felt like between him and God, protected me from really just being thrown into that culture. and being sucked into the culture because I was pretty impressionable growing up.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean it was a middle class neighborhood. We had a house, we had a yard, we had a dog. So people think of Chicago. It wasn't the Chicago that you may see now in the news, and
Right.
But I mean, we had our fair share of violence. The fighting was more of a thing than shooting. Now, nowadays, back in the day, it was more fighting. And then we had the riffraff. Growing up in the neighborhood, we think a couple times I was actually talking to someone about the hardship of growing up, and we were on government assistance, for a while. I remember hard cheese in a box. I remember some of the food items that we talked about that, most people that are on, subsistence or some type of assistance or some type of aid we had, but it never felt like that.
Sure.
Yeah, it felt like this was okay. This was food. There was never a struggle there growing up. So yeah, I mean, I felt like I was fairly privileged, even though there was not a lot of money that was coming in. Now that I look back now and know some of the math behind what it takes to raise a family. That between me and my father working and hustling, and my mom worked full time until she passed away later. I felt like we always had needs that were met, and so yeah, it was awesome. I think
That's incredible.
Yeah,
I mean, that really is, because it's easy to, especially in the day and age we live in, to look at all the stuff I could have had if they'd have done it, da. But I think it's just true is when kids feel like, man, my parents are there, right? They're there, they care. It's hard to look back and be like, I was missing something, like, my case is something very similar. Like, my dad always worked a lot, but when my dad was home, he was present. Right. So I don't ever think of my dad not being there. Like, that's not in how I think of life, even though, like, in the actuality, he did work a lot.
Right.
But I was never felt that way to me. I didn't realize I was poor till I met other kids. They're the ones who told me.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I had, it was middle class family, from a standpoint of most of the parents I think had either two working parents,
Sure.
or one parent was working, but then there was another, like the lady down the street, a good friend of mine, his wife or his mom was pretty much over the candy store for the neighborhood. But I mean, they were a function business, and bought in income. So it's like, she was working from home pretty much, but that was her business.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I saw a lot of kids that really weren't struggling.
Yeah.
But then there were some kids that were not as well off. I would say on our block it was interesting because there was a lot more. It seemed like a lot more stability, although there was still some destruction, within homes and other aspects that I felt like some of the kids that didn't grow up to have some of the opportunities that I had. Some of it was because of some of the dynamics in the household,
Sure.
or what they even exposed themselves to. But yeah, I didn't really see that aspect of poverty as you would say, and didn't feel at all that we were poor.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was interesting that I saw Chicago and got exposed to dynamics around where I was, but I felt like, man, it was such an awesome thing to now look back and know friends of mine that just never made it out, or
Right.
for whatever reason just didn't make anything out of their life. And it's like, man, I feel like God has allowed me to see more and do more than I feel like I ever would have thought or imagined. So
you got to experience a very beautiful version of Chicago.
yeah, I mean, overall, it was
Overall.
still the South Side is still the city, and
Yeah.
it was still segregated in ways that I'm not proud that I held more prejudices than I wish I would have, against culture groups, against races. But I thankfully, like I said, having family that my dad was raised on the west side of Chicago, Maywood, Broadview area, and that actually, between the fact of him and having brothers and sisters, that even though my dad, well, actually it was interesting because my dad and his first wife were still cordial.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I actually called his mother, Mama Shirley. I used to go over to the house and hang out with them and got to know my brothers and my sister.
That's awesome.
Growing up, so it was interesting that we still had a pretty good relationship, and so I feel like I got to see the whole Chicago in a sense. I went to a school. Again, this is my parents. I think protecting me, didn't put me in the public schools in the neighborhood because they were I would say horrible because I know friends that went through them and they turned out all right. But they wouldn't be ranked high on the education scale.
On average, this was not the best experience.
Not even. So they made sure that I got exposed to good education. My brother and I. So we went to school out of the neighborhood, and I can't remember if we had to fake an address or they were able to take the address, and the school was allowing people outside, not having a zone that you had to go to that school. But just being involved in that introduced us to people outside of our neighborhood because most of our neighborhood was predominantly black, predominantly background similar. And so going to that school, seeing different races, I think, one of the first times that I saw different races was that school. There were some fairly wealthy kids that were there because the neighborhood was a pretty well-to-do area, close to a well-to-do area. So, I mean, I think I saw and got to maybe envy or desire things outside of what maybe I was okay and comfortable with when I saw that. And then that's where I started being influenced by things of the world and things that were kind of being exposed to me a little bit more at that time than I probably had ever done growing up.
Sure. Yeah, that was something that was interesting to me. One of my best friends in late high school and college went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, and I'd go visit her in the summers and winter. And growing up here in San Antonio, we're a military city, so it's very metropolitan in just a sense. You got people from all backgrounds, all places, and everybody's all mixed together, and then they leave in 2 years.
Right.
And it was weird going to Chicago that was very segmented. Like, we were certain areas, like, we're like, hey, look, we can't go to this. This is the Dominican area. And I was like, well, I'm half Mexican. They're like, well, you're half of something too much. Like, we can't go over there. Right. We can't go to those places. So was it like that growing up in Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree it was. I feel like I know there were borders and, I was exposed to some of those stereotypes or some of that segregation. I mean, there's streets that you can literally, a class experience I had, fast forwarding, from early childhood, a little bit, real early childhood to maybe high school years.
Sure.
A friend of mine, we went to a baseball game in Chicago. It's either the Cubs or bust. But I'm from the South Side of Chicago, so the Sox do exist. And so we were Sox fans to some degree, but those were usually the cheaper tickets. And so we went to a Sox baseball game, and there's an expressway interstate, I-57, that pretty much goes from the South Side down to downtown areas. And on the street, there's actually, if you go on, basically toward the city, which is directionally north, there's actually on the right side going toward the city, there's a lot of, don't exist anymore, but used to be the projects.
Sure.
And then on the left side was where the Sox stadium was. And then there's an area called Bridgeport, which is pretty much a redneck area. And so there's one interstate that's separating two totally different worlds. And so we wound up going to the game and being cheapskates or not having money or not wanting to spend money. We're not going to pay $10 a park. We're going to park on the street for free. And so we had a parking space maybe 4 blocks away, walking distance from the park. And then walking 4 blocks to the park, we had people with a slingshot, slingshot rocks hit us in the back. And I mean, it didn't hurt much, but it was just a taunting aspect.
Oh, yeah.
Walked under a bridge, and as soon as we got to the bridge, a bottle of rocks, came crashing down and broke behind us. And it was just wild to see, looking across the street. That's the ghetto,
right?
Just as I would see, with people that were looked like us, but probably a little bit more savage than us to some degree. And then to be in an environment that they were racially discriminating us, within the eye distance, a stone throw distance, that it helped me, see that those clear lines are clear. Like you said, they're clear in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it wasn't wasn't that you weren't always welcome in certain areas. It's almost like you just had to know when to go places, and when not to go places. So yeah, I definitely that was my probably one of my first experiences where I saw it firsthand. I mean, there were other experiences that I probably had seen before, and even definitely afterwards. But that was a clear, distinction to say, yeah, Chicago's the most diverse, segregated city. I mean, to date, I feel like that's the case for Chicago. Is there's so much diversity and culture. I mean, we used to go to,
Oh man.
for lack of, I guess, try not to be sensitive, but I mean, people still probably call it. But we used to go to Jewtown, and that was where you went and got the deals on buying clothes and and items. They had a Polish place that Chicago is pretty still famous for Polish sausages and
Right.
grilled onions and mustard. So we would go and get real good deals and get good food. But it was like that was an area that you knew that you were going, and you would haggle with the guys. And whether or not it was truly a neighborhood of Jews, that were like practicing Jewish faith people,
Right.
or why they called it Jewtown, if it was just cheap people. I don't know, or place to bargain shop. But it was like those environments that you see towns and have Little Mexico, Chinatown. So
Yeah.
I think there are probably a lot of cities that have the same titles, but I feel like Chicago truly identifies with that, and you usually have to know how to mingle and when to mingle in those places,
Right.
or you have to know people in those places. Like Chicago was always a place. Whenever you went someplace growing up, you walk with a purpose. So you just didn't walk around sightseeing, and it's like whenever I grew up, it was always I knew where I was at and where I was going, and it was purposeful getting there. I mean, I would look at the world around me knowing that I was still making sure that I was walking from A to B, because it felt like if you didn't look like you knew what you were doing, you were a target.
Sure.
And so,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, I had that experience.
Yeah.
Even not that long. I guess the last time I was in Chicago would have been 2000. I guess 2011 was my last time up there.
Okay.
So it's been wow. That does not feel as far away as it actually
is. Yeah, I know.
So that's interesting. So going from there, going to high school, what was that transition for you for like high school, college? What was that like?
So in high school, I went to a Catholic high school, which again was protection. Not going through the high school system, public school system there, and that was actually a good experience to where I was my graduating class. I think we were 400 plus students, maybe a little bit less, but there were only four black kids. And,
Wow.
And so I got to really experience a little bit of society, as I would say, like real society in high school, being that it was different than my neighborhood, because I still had to go back home every day and got involved in all the stuff high school kids go through. But I feel like that was a good shelter for me, getting exposed into that environment, and really seeing the importance of education and how much it could change if you really committed to it. And so I was able to go through, get good grades, get exposed to some things that I probably never would have got exposed to growing up, and then was actually a good student, but didn't put the effort for it to go to get scholarships to go to college. I just thought I was a young black kid, felt like I was defying the odds, and I'm a golden child in a sense for colleges, because I felt like that was just not something I saw. So everybody wants to consider putting me in school and paying for me, but that wasn't the case. I had to actually apply for scholarships and get money. And so when I found out late that my grades and my background, they weren't going to be the ticket to go to school, I kind of got a little scared. But there was a guy that came in and recruited our school, probably close to my senior year, and he was in the Navy, and told me about programs that, because I had never had exposure to the military, didn't have background in the military at all. And so he told me about what was available, and wound up actually mentioning medical. And I wanted to potentially be a doctor, but wasn't sure. And then when he got, kind of me exposed to what nursing was and the scholarships they had, and from a summer camp I went to a while back, I think the year before, that it was like, man, that sounds like a cool ticket. And it just so happened the school I went to that he was kind of really promoting was the school my aunt, uncle, and my cousins had gone to. So I would have been a third generation attendee to Hampton University, which is where I ended up going. and so got a scholarship. Went through that process to get enrolled in not only the military and be now a bondage servant in the military in the government world, but getting exposed to being away from home, full time for the first time, and having to see if those time management and responsibility practices that my parents had tried to instill in me, if they really worked, and found out real quick that they didn't, because when I got the liberty to do what I wanted to do, I did what I wanted to do, and it wasn't always the right thing.
Right.
But while I'm going through, thankfully, 4 years there, and had an awesome experience of just meeting some interesting people. It was a historically black college, HBCU, so it was cool that I'd had a grown up experience in an inner city, predominantly black neighborhood. Middle school, growing through K through 8th grade, that was a pretty diverse population. High school, that was predominantly white and religious. Going to now a historically black college, I felt like I had, and getting ready to go into a military environment where I was going to be a minority again. I feel like just being exposed to all those different environments helped shape me to really see things a little differently than I had grown up. Because my mom was always she was everybody's person. She was mom to everybody. Really just loved people, and you could tell that by her. My dad was a little bit more, classic, Chicago, man growing up, and had been raised primarily in predominantly black neighborhoods. But they never really raised me to be that way. They still were both very cultured, and had a pretty good background exposure to them. My dad never finished college, but still was educated, and definitely I feel like was educated in the ways of the street. Although he was never really running the streets as an adult, as I saw, he was very knowledgeable about the environments and really taught me how to know my surroundings.
He seemed, I mean, to be able to provide the framework and foundation he did for your family. I mean, that's a very wise man, and obviously a very intelligent man, to be able to navigate all of that and still have to figure out how to be a man and a father. And
yeah, no, I mean, I guess I never did. There's so many things that I've heard and have been said about my dad, just based on his relationship with my mom, and some of the things that I feel like maybe he could have did better as a dad. But man, I just as I look at the fact of what a father does, that he to some degree provides. Although my mom was a breadwinner later in us growing up and them being married, I feel like early on he actually set at least a good precedence that I either didn't see a lot of it, or it didn't affect me as much, or maybe my mom hit it well. I'm not sure. But I still feel like just the role he took protected me from a lot of the things that could have really easily influenced me to go the wrong way and mess me up to. Not to say that I'm not messed up now, but definitely could have messed me up more from what I did. How my growing up experience was. But yeah, he I feel like he prepared me for a lot of things that I learned later in life, applied later in life. And really show the example, of strength,
Right.
and respect. I mean, a lot of the kids in the neighborhood respected my parents, him for the man he was, my mom for the caring, nurturing person he was.
It's amazing.
So yeah, just seeing it, I mean, it's kind of envious, because I've never, I don't feel like I've never really desired for that, but just, I've never really had to some degree that aspect that I kind of almost wanted. But then now it's like, just that wasn't my role. I wasn't supposed to have the same posture that he had. And it's like my confidence came in different ways, and I feel like I grew into that a little bit more. Maybe later in life, but I feel like I grew into it differently than what I maybe saw him, or how I saw him being the person that you almost could tell people what they were gonna give him. That's just kind of the presence that I felt like, the confidence that he had. But yeah, I mean, it definitely, as I look back now, it definitely helped shape the way that I thought through things and helped process through things, and kind of even the independence that I had, not really being part of groups and wanting to be part of different circles, but being comfortable not doing that, helped shape to when I, got out and joined the military, and, started living on my own, and, doing my thing as an adult, young adult. that I really feel like a lot of stuff that they had, even if I didn't apply it right away, I think it prepared me for not being afraid to talk to people, not being afraid to be myself. Seeing that my mom was a person that would give you the shirt off her back, and people would say that she was too kind and generous, but it was like, man, and I look at it, that was her. She didn't know how to be anything but her. And it just, now that I look back, it was definitely something I wish I would have probably, maybe dwelled on a little bit more at that age, and not try to fit in or not try to be part of things that just, probably, weren't mistakes, but just didn't have to be the way that they were, the way that they ended up being. But yeah.
And I think that's how it is for all of us. I think it's G.K. Chesterton. He said, "You live life in the present and in the forward, but you understand life looking back."
Yeah, I like that.
And that's just growing. For all of us. That I think what's hard for a lot of people is they look back, and instead of and leading to college, military, when does Christ start to become a meaningful part of your life? What did that start to look like?
So nothing up until after college. I was exposed to Christianity through people that said they were Christians, and I went to chapel for the sake of events. I wasn't even I forgot the word they call Easter and Christmas.
Oh, CEO of Christmas Easter only.
Yeah. I wasn't even that Christian, because I didn't even make that a priority to go during the big events or the more commercial events. But there was a guy that I was ended up pledging a fraternity in college, and there was a guy that, actually two guys, but one I saw that was a lot more. He was walking more in his faith. We were, doing everything fraternities would have did with girls, alcohol, parties, just feel like being irresponsible growing up. And he just wasn't as engaged as we were doing. I mean, he was with us, but he just wasn't engaged. And so I think it probably stuck in my mind and that was attractive to me in a sense to where he came to visit me after, I think maybe 2 or 3 years after I graduated. Came to visit, and right now I don't know if it was truly God sending him to visit. I don't even know why he was there to visit, but we ended up connecting and sitting down in the living room where I was living, and I don't know what happened, but just started talking about the Bible, started talking about faith, and he just started sharing some things with me. And as he was sharing some things with me, it felt like it was enticing, and I wanted to hear about it. And I think he mentioned, whether or not, what salvation was, and what I had to do to be saved, and asked me if I wanted to give my life over to that and receive Christ, and the details of what he said exactly I can't remember, but I was like, yeah, this is I'm about this, and it ended up being a moment where I felt like that was where I committed my life to Christ, and was that fire, that change that you hear people talking about. I experienced it. It was in a real way. Even though I was still involved in sin, wasn't really fully willing to commit to walking away from sin, but I felt that relationship at least pull to him. And so I think probably between that time frame, and I can't remember if I had assignment orders to go overseas to Spain at the time, but it was shortly afterwards. And between that time frame, I think it was maybe 20. Oh, was it 2000? Maybe 2000, because I went to Spain in 2001, so it probably was around 2000, maybe beginning of 2001, when I got saved and went overseas. And probably between when I got saved and 6 months after I got to Spain, I was looking for, military has chaplains, or chapel is the military church. So I was looking for one. I can't remember if I was going to church after I got saved, but I was reading the Bible a little bit more. I had a girl I was kind of dating, and she was actually following Christian ways, but we were sinning. Not involved in premarital sex, but we were definitely sinning, just infatuation. And just I think in my change, it kind of convicted her of some things, and so we started having a different relationship. Probably say 6 months into Spain, when I got there, I was going to chapel, but I was still foot in the world and foot in the faith. And just being in Spain, they say winning anywhere, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So
Right.
felt like that applied to Spain. When in Spain, do as the Spaniards do, and so I was, very early in my work career, I was going to work and doing my shift work, especially if I was working days. And then I had a friend that would pull me in, and we would go out 9 o'clock to eat dinner, and 11 o'clock to party, and 2 o'clock to after party, and 7 o'clock to work.
Oh man.
So it was just like the exposure of that, just being in that environment, started the down spiral for me to get back into living for life for me and living in the world. And so it took a while, going through my deployment in Spain. I was wayward, wasn't really close to God. The chaplain that I was kind of close with there, he left, and I don't recall plugging back into whoever replaced him. So I didn't have any influences around me that were Christian, that were at least were following Christ, Christian by name only. And pretty much that whole time there was just a time frame that I wish I could replay to just take advantage of what was around me, the beauty of the culture. I mean, I got to experience Spain because I lived off base and started learning Spanish and got to travel a lot. So I mean, I got to experience what I felt like Spain was. I got to go, that independence in me, and my mom maybe traveling came out to where I went to Italy and did a kind of a hostel tour for 7 days and got to see something.
Oh man, that's cool.
And I went on my own, went by myself. And so I got to experience some things, but I was definitely seeking after the world. I was caught up in got introduced unfortunately early to pornography, so was involved with impure sexual thoughts and actions at an early age, and it didn't help that I was in an environment where promiscuity was the thing that was invited, and so
Right.
I ended up with relationships with other women and dealing with things that I just I definitely want to shelter my children from as much as possible and not have them have to go through some of the things that I wish if I would have had a spiritual guide or even somebody pouring into me that would have stopped me from being exposed to things that I was exposed to. But leaving Spain and going to California was kind of the start of getting reintroduced back to my faith, to where I was going to a church in California where I lived, not regularly, but at least going back to church.
Okay.
And then, like I say, being in California for about a year is when my mom passed away, and just really, opened my eyes to just how precious and unexpected life is, and just it's wild because I was broke, a mess, literally a pure mess for probably about a good day or two. When I found out, well, actually, take that back. It was probably about a good 12 hours where I just, sobbed and uncontrollably cried, just couldn't control myself. And then I just thought, I think my mom was sick for a while and just thought of what she wanted. And she always kind of would harp on being at peace. She didn't want people to mourn her death, because death is in her end, it's not the end. It's the start of, that's why I feel like, even though I don't know she was a Christian, I felt like how she talked, that she was saved. I mean, I prayed that she was.
Sure.
But just her mindset was that she didn't want a funeral. She wanted a party. She didn't want people to act a certain way when she died. And so literally I felt like I was in a respect mode for her, that, probably that 12 hours. I think I've been sad a lot because, I mean, when I think about the fact that she didn't meet my wife, she didn't meet my kids, that's something that you would want, or my wife and them kids didn't meet her.
Right.
But it's like, man, it's like I've since that time frame, I've yet to cry over her passing, and I don't know if it's me not coping well or just I realizing, man, it's so much bigger than and trying to honor her and what she asked for. That it's like I don't regret the fact that I haven't felt sad or shedded tears because I do miss her, but it's like I can't do anything about that. So why waste that energy in that way? But that was a time frame where I felt like I was really, maybe God was really encouraging me to say, yeah, I'm not going to force you into this, but you really need to think some things through differently. And so yeah, we dealt through that, and then probably my mom died in 2004. Fast forward really a year later, because I mean I was still living a single person's life to some degree, not as wild as Spain, but I was still wild. And I met my now wife Kenjada in Long Beach, because I was between Long Beach, California, and San Diego, and just hopping circles and just didn't find really much enjoyment out of people in either. So I got online to just try to do something different, and I met my wife. And I think between the fact of meeting her, talking with her, she shared some things with me that were different than other women I had been with. She didn't want to be involved with a man physically until she got married. Just it was different, and so we actually started to relate a little bit more, not only personally but started to talk a little bit about Bible. I went to I think Bible a couple of times, or church a couple of times with her. I had kind of been involved a little bit more with a church locally, and started just hearing some of the things I heard back in 2000, 2001 when I got saved. Those things were starting to resonate again. So it's like the verse we talked about before, even the podcast, that Christ says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And I felt like God was always there. It was just I wasn't reaching out, and so came to where I was actually deployed with the military overseas in the Middle East, to where that's where I felt like the recommitment came. Just really in the Word more, seeing destruction, really kind of understanding that, man, this has to be real. There has to be a real relationship that we're walking in. And I was looking at opportunity to potentially bring somebody else to my life, marry Kenjada, and what that was about. And so it was, I think that was a time frame. They say the sand in the desert is a reflection of that. It'll show you a true reflection.
Sure.
You would never think sand would be like a mirror, but man, it really helps you see the type of person you are. And so I was really at a point where I was like, man, I need to really make a change. And so it was not an official rededication, but I felt like the actions I was showing really rededicated my life back to my faith and what that was about. And so when I got back from deployment 7 months later, proposed to my now wife, as I got off the bus, and we were getting ready to join our families again. Made a lot of other people mad and frustrated because I was the only one that proposed. So a lot of other women weren't happy with that. not at all. But yeah, the process since then has definitely been a journey. But I think since then it's really been trying to at least be mindful that God needs to be a priority, and just between that growing relationship personally, and then later getting married shortly afterwards, and then living life married with children since, it's been an opportunity to really try to day to day die to the flesh.
How has walking with Jesus since those moments, how has that shaped your passions and dreams? Did that start to change for you at all?
Not necessarily. I mean, I was still in the military. I was more transitioning from when I got married to where my next assignment was, and it was actually close to Chicago, which was a dream to some degree of being close to family again. From practicing bedside medical care to now doing a lot more training, and where I retired, doing more administrative training management type roles. That it really kind of helped me, I guess, solidify that I was in the right place as a nurse. That I think professionally that was the right fit for me. Just having a holistic view of the person. They teach you in school biopsychosocial, cultural, political, and even spiritual being. And doctors kind of, I guess, learn it as well. But I feel like nurses, we really live it.
Yeah.
And so I definitely felt the person that I've learned. I'm not a big proponent of the spiritual gifting, but I do feel like God has given me an ability to be a lot more hands-on and a lot more nurturing. Especially when I mean it's natural, but it's to the point where I have to feel like I have to work a lot hard at it between my internal circle of my family. But I do know that that's where he how he designed me and how he gifted me in a sense to naturally do some of those things. So it definitely made me more aware that that's where I was. And then I was fortunate enough, like you said, in the military to realize that, I had a good thing being able to go different places, live in different states, areas, that I didn't see a reason why I need to do anything differently. And so kind of realizing that the military thing that I thought was going to be 4 years and out and do something different, the career started to become more clear, going back to school. And so I felt like to some degree, I don't know if I was necessarily chasing where I feel like God had put me, but I do feel like everywhere we went, from even being married first time we were married away from California in the Midwest, going to Virginia, staying out there for school and then an assignment, that I was more intentional to be plugged into the church body and being more engaged with growing in my knowledge of the faith, growing in my commitment to try to connect with people. I wasn't as probably serious to share my faith and be evangelistic as I feel like I'm growing into wanting to do more now.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely think there was a light moment to where I was being able to do the things that were being called to us as a Christian. To the fruits of the Spirit. Love, patience, peace. I felt like that was natural. So to me, it was maybe a lack of clarity. Now that we talk about it, whether or not I was just operating in how God, designed me and how He built me, versus me truly understanding whether or not I was just submitting to Jesus in the faith and walking in obedience. So
Yeah, I think for many people, we hear, right, well, I'm called. So calling is a missionary or a pastor or something of that nature, but we're called because He has called us from death to life.
Amen.
And yes, there's certain giftings for spiritual things and positions, and I don't want to minimize those either. But I feel like as a faith, we've minimized the fact that all of us are called. And so you being in the military, you being a nurse, you using the giftings God's given you, isn't not walking in your calling. Right. And maybe walking with Christ changes how we would do those, but it doesn't necessarily mean my career changes. And I think there's some people who feel like, well, I can't follow God in my career, or I can't follow God in this space, where I think walking with God becomes normative. Is all spaces I have are His, and until He makes a way for me to leave, I don't really think we're supposed to. We're supposed to be faithful. So I want to, kind of commend you in that. Is it's like, no, I think you were following God. You were just being faithful to what you had already committed to be, and there's a difference between like, well, I'm gonna do something and ask God to bless it, and saying, well, God, I'm just walking with you, and until I know otherwise, I'm just gonna stay the course, and that's what faithfulness looks like. So I think you really epitomize that in your journey.
Yeah, I think the one thing that if anything, that I recently, I would say recently, maybe in the last 3 or 4 years, that I got comfortable, and I see that to some degree in elements of my family. I won't point out who or where, but that genetic thing you talked about, I was very gifted in being a liar. I knew how to lie real well, and didn't really maybe feel the conviction even in some areas of when I would not tell the truth, and it would be small things sometimes. And so I think probably not until I felt like when I was in areas where I was committed to God and I was consistent and faithful in His Word, consistently seeking after Him, even in prayer and worship. Because we had some hard spots even growing up early in our marriage.
Sure.
And there were times that I felt like I was actually truly just only God and God alone was sustaining me. And even though I was still had the abilities to do certain things, that's where I felt that the presence of God was, I need you, right now a little bit more than I feel like I've needed you before. That I feel like those were times that I really was more convicted on, you know, telling the truth because it was the right thing to do. Versus before, I was good at it, you know, wasn't really suffering the consequences of getting caught, or I wasn't getting caught and not suffering the consequences. And so I feel like I had a shift to where I really started, you know, understanding, and this is later in my life, like I say, probably within the last even 3 or 4 years, that it's like, what is behind the aspect of why I feel like I need to not tell the truth. You know, is it I feel like people are gonna have a different impression on me, that I'm gonna be seen as not reliable, or you know, somebody that they can't trust. And so to me, it was getting down to more of the roots of getting past what me and how me was getting in the way of of realizing that there may be some weaknesses I have when it comes to planning certain things, or sometimes, you know, not being consistent in ways of following through with things. I mean, I've always been a reliable guy, you know, overall, but there are some areas that I feel like that I lack some of either the planning, or some of the ability to really organize the thoughts that I have to allow ideas that I have turn into action. And so
Yeah.
I felt like that was a real disconnect between, that was a weakness sign if I didn't put on the front that this is what I'm doing, or why, you know, I'm late, or this is not why I'm not participating because of this. So I feel like lying was a way to mask that, or to cover that up. And so now it's actually, I'm, you know, it's still a struggle, to where, you know, it still, it can come naturally, but I have a better, I guess what I say, a guard around making sure that it doesn't come out, you know, and making sure that that's not something that I'm going to justify and validate. And if I have done that recently, I've been really, really trying to be really more consistent to let people know that, you know, man, I told you something, but that wasn't the truth. You know, this is what happened. Or, you know, even with my kids, that, you know, they've been really, you know, encouraging me, because they have had, you know, situations where they'll lie, you know, through their teeth easily, and it's like, there's no weight, and I don't want to come down on them and just rebuke them in a sense. But it's been an opportunity for me to come to them and say, why are you doing this? What's the reason behind why you feel like you can't tell me the truth? And so I'm hoping that, you know, the stuff that I had to deal with, and, you know, lack of mentorship, lack of accountability that I maybe even I wish I had earlier, especially my Christian walk. I'm hoping that now I can use the opportunities to say, hey, you know, I don't know what type of image you had of me, you know, but I'm rotten, you know, to the core, and, you know, the thoughts that I have are not always pure thoughts. That I can use that as an opportunity to help them wrestle with some of what they're dealing with now, especially if it's a lying thing to stay out of trouble, or a lying thing to do what you want to do, your own desires, hanging out with friends, or a lying thing to, like, you know, the first time I admitted to my wife back it was in Virginia Beach, maybe like 13, felt like maybe 13, 14, that I, you know, had a problem with pornography. You know, I was addicted to pornography. I don't want to tell my wife the truth, because then that's going to ruin our marriage, or, you know,
Right.
and to me, it was a conviction, one, that she needed to know, because I want to be transparent. But it was the way I felt like that I was willing to go through to heal my marriage, you know, and to make my marriage better, was to be transparent and to work through issues that I had,
Right.
that she unfortunately was bought into. So, you know, little times I feel like the honesty and transparency is something that I really value a lot more than I've ever had. But I'm also, I try to be mindful that that's not something that I'm holding somebody against, that's still at a point where I may have been early
Right.
in my life. So that's a real struggle that I've had, that I feel like is still a battle, but I feel like I've been delivered from, like, you know, Christ conquering death. It's like I've been delivered from the power that I feel like that maybe even had before, that it doesn't now.
Yeah, you know, I think that's what makes walking with God beautiful, when we see our own shortcomings, because we all have them. And, you know, I tell my son, like, they were being, like I was joking before, you know, I'm parenting me out of him.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's like, well, Dad, you've done that. And I said, son, I know. And I said, but I want you to be a better man than I am. You know, like my job on this planet isn't to make you me or to make me the standard.
Right.
My job is to help you be the best man you can be. And
Amen.
sometimes it means you got to be better than me. And I'm working on it. Like,
Right.
I'm trying,
Yeah.
but I'm not perfect either.
Yeah.
And when you forget your own forgiveness and your own struggles, it is easier to see somebody who's struggling with sin and condemn them. But when you're like, man, I have been there, it's easier to walk beside them in that process of repentance, because it's a process. No matter what anybody wants to say, repentance is yes, it's a moment, but then there's the process of actually changing. Right? Yet I may recognize I need to change, but that can't be the end of it. That's the start of it. Where then it heads into is now, because that word we use it to turn around, but it literally means to even turn around my thinking.
Yeah.
Right? Like everything about me in that situation's got to start to change. And that doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
For some people, it does. And for some situations, it does. Like, God does something miraculous. So I don't want to ever say, like, it can't happen. But for normative Christian living, for many of us, there's a process.
Right.
And we can walk with each other in that process and in that struggle. So I know we're wrapping up, kind of coming to the end. Is there anything that you kind of want to share about either where you're at with God now, where you're walking, or anything you want to share with people just to kind of leave them with some a thought or something?
Yeah, I'm starting to, I think I've known and probably understood, but I'm still wrestling with the fact of Romans 12, doing a study in a men's group a couple years ago. And it's, just a verse, two verses. I beseech you, there, brothers, to surrender yourself as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to the Lord, which is our first service to God. And I think that that's something that really we truly won't live in victory, or we won't live in freedom until that happens. And I mean, there are areas now, just the aspect of, being out the military for 3 years, and that, I mean, even though it really didn't identify me or define me, it shaped a lot of what I do, and really how I think, because I feel like we can get real sheltered in an environment like that where things are kind of plug and play to some degree. Although there are a lot of independent thinkers and a lot of strong-willed people that come out of the military and that adapt, sometimes even better than folks that have done live non-military lifestyles most of their life. But I think that piece is really been something that I have to almost ask myself daily, because the struggle of chasing security is real. Being an entrepreneur now and really not having a track for a job in a sense is real. But I hate to say it, but also I'm at peace saying it, is that I really don't want to ever find myself chasing money and a job anymore. I'm trying to be a person that chases purpose. And so for me, even being with what I'm doing, I'm meeting people, all the time that I would never otherwise meet. But I still feel like I fall short to some degree. I mean, I'm living out Christ. I think they can see a difference, and I've had people say that to me when it comes to business. But at the same time, just being obedient to make sure that I'm figuring out what does God want me to do in this situation. And it's a lot different than making a transaction.
Right.
The interaction is, I say the interaction is more than the transaction. And so for me, it's been a journey of that surrender, truly figuring out what that looks like for you, whether it's surrendering addictions, whether it's surrendering, your own will, whether it's surrendering your own, desires of chasing after things in life that are wasting away, whether it's surrendering your control aspects of your power, whether it's surrendering habits and hobbies that you have that are not honoring to God, or that are taking up a lot more time that could be used to either better yourself or help grow you to be the man that God is kind of hopefully showing you that you need to be, either through His Word or through you directly in prayer. But really, taking advantage of the short amount of time we had to live each day, as unto the Lord, but figure out what that means for you, and it doesn't have to be at a grand scale. Sometimes that, like for me, it's now, hearing stuff from my wife of serving her better, realizing there's some things God puts on my heart, and even I feel like shares to me that this is what I need to do, and understanding what that, understanding clearly the voice of my mind versus the voice of God, and a lot of times discerning that difference. But then when I hear clearly what it is, going forth and doing what's right. So yeah, if I can, talk to myself, over and over again, which I will past this time, but even the other people that may hear this is, man, just try to figure out what it is that you're truly seeking after. And if it's not God first and foremost, then all the other stuff is going to catch up with you eventually. And hopefully it's an opportunity for you to realize that God's going to be able to use you and do things with you wherever you are, and even in circumstances that he didn't bless and, give to you. But if you're obedient to see, where he has you now, and then what your calling or what your assignment is from now or going forward, then hopefully that's something that, more people will see God in you, will be attracted to, seeing that their brokenness is where they are, and that they need to turn from that to something that will give them hope, and that, the only hope we know is in Christ. But then also just to realize that there's probably more of an impact, and I say this even to me, that you can make when you do that impact that's waiting for you to be made is probably, more than you ever can think or imagine in your own little small world of, the house or life, or, it's like the comforts that you have. So, trying to get out of yourself, I think will eventually get you out of those comfort areas, and will have you living a life that will be, more fulfilling and more, provide more satisfaction than you could ever seek. And you'll get some of that in your own physical human form. But there have been times when I just feel like that obedience has led to times like, man, I never would have thought that this would be where I am. And I don't do it enough, so it's like I desire for me to experience that more. But that's something that I've seen through testimonies, and just looking at what God's word says. Is that, seek me and you will find me. Seek me with all your heart. And so I'm trying to be more consistent to do that, and hopefully be an example that broken lives, which is, even though I said I had a stable life, I knew there was brokenness there.
Right.
I didn't get raised in a Christian home, so it's kind of a good thing I didn't have to unlearn a lot of doctrine or philosophies or theologies.
Yeah, you didn't have bad theology to overcome.
I didn't. But at the same time, there were things that I feel like were godly principles and morals and values that were good, but it didn't provide the truth that I needed to hear, that I'm thankfully exposed to now. So it's just trying to take the aspect of, you don't have to, come from a broken background, or you have to be a privileged background in order for God to meet you on stable ground.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of the one thing I would say to do, is to put God as priority in everything you do. And not the best example. I'm a good preacher, but I'm not a good follower. So I need to do it more myself. But that's the one thing that I've just seen God putting him first. He's able to cover not only multitude of sins, but he's able just to bring that peace that they say, the peace that passes all understanding, in so many different ways. That's my hope, is that people would maybe hear that, if anything, from this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's the part I have that was the most unexpected aspect of walking with Christ, is when I gave my life to him, I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. But the adventure that it's been, and the people I meet, which includes you,
right?
Were it not for Christ, I never would have met it.
Amen. Yep.
And God brings people together, and sometimes it's like, man, we're from completely different walks of life, different generations, different hobbies, but man, we really can connect on Christ, and it's because it's a family he's building, not one we're building.
Right.
And as Brother Keith has said, when you put God first, life becomes an adventure, even if your job doesn't change, even if your home doesn't change, because God starts to do things that you never see or expect, because he's using you,
right,
not as a cog in the divine wheel, but you as a person for whom he has died and loves.
Amen.
And that's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah.
Well, Brother Keith, I want to thank you for being a part of this and joining us for this episode. We want to thank everybody else as well. If you're listening and if you have any questions or you ever like, hey, I want to be on there, if you go to our website, we're going to get through a couple gentlemen first, and then I'm going to start publicly posting so people can sign up to be on the podcast. But we're going to cover some other topics. We'll have other people come on and share things, that maybe we just ran out of time to share in their life, or different topics entirely that maybe are questions or philosophical things we're wrestling through. We want to help everybody know that we all have a past, and through Jesus we have a future, and that He can take us to our other side of yesterday. Thank you all so much. God bless.
Thanks for listening to The Other Side of Yesterday. If today's story inspired you, share it with somebody who needs a little hope. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of redemption, faith, and transformation. Remember, we all have a past. Through Jesus, we have a future.